All right, it's 4:05. Let's go ahead and get started, and we'll see who else shows up. I just posted the link on Facebook as well. Uh, want to, have an opportunity to go through kind of what we're looking for now. We've added some additional support for looking at lesson plans. We're going to be doing our deep dive into the existing batch of lessons that have been accepted, meaning that I was able to go ahead and look at the lesson, see the lesson, make sure it has all the pieces. And then once I know that, then we can give credit for grant purposes. And so that's why I'm starting with the template. So something you're very familiar with now. You'll notice it has 10 slides. That's the bare minimum, right? That's what we're looking for to check the box that says, I submitted a lesson plan. Does it have the title slide? Are there notes and materials, right? It needs to have both of those. For the most part, teachers are really great about that. The frame of reference I always give is, would a brand new teacher, there's a lot of them in classrooms right now, would a brand new teacher be able to follow your lesson plan? The answer is no. There's a high likelihood that it's not going to be published to the website. So that's just something to be aware of. That starts with notes about what the lesson's like, what are some tips and tricks, what are we looking for here, what does it look like for the teacher, and the materials list to be specific. If it's just like popsicle sticks and paper plates, great. But if it's specifically like, oh, this robot or this engineering kit, it's really helpful to have a link. That way teachers can be like, oh, that's what we need to do this lesson. So this is an important slide. It generally is well done, but it's something to consider. Um, the standard, as you all know, the bare minimum requirement is to have at least one academic standard from one of the STEM areas. That's the minimum, right? So one science standard, one tech standard, engineering standard, math standard. Anything beyond that is great. So if there's ELA standards, social studies standards, art standards, anything else that connects, please include them. But know that the minimum is one academic standard. The other thing we're going to be looking for when we do our deep dive is, does the activity actually align with the standard? Because a lot of times I'll get a lesson, let's say it's got to do with physics, force and motion, and it's a sixth grade standard, and there's no force and motion standard for sixth grade, as an example. But they throw one in there and it doesn't really align. Just know that that's a reason why a lesson may not be published. So those are all different things. Like, right, today's focus is not just how to finish a lesson. You all know that. You've all done that. But specifically looking at, I want to contribute to the lesson plan database. I want my work to be there with my name on it, say that I've published to this great resource. How do I ensure that that's going to happen? So that's kind of what we're looking for here. It's not necessarily more. It can still be one standard, but it needs to be well aligned with the activity and with whatever assessment suggestions you're giving. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. Objective, we're all familiar with what objectives are and what they look like. At least one, more than one's fine. I can't say I've ever had a lesson not published because of the objective, because honestly, if it's not great, I'm just going to rewrite it and make sure it aligns and just move on. So that's not something to worry about. Same thing with the agenda. I see all sorts of different formats for this slide. That's fine. In my mind, it was a simple breakdown of what's going to happen. Because again, if I'm a new teacher and I'm approaching this, like, okay, this is this great idea, but what does it look like? Well, you're going to start with this opening activity. You're going to show this video. You're going to do this activity. There's going to be a reflection, and this is how you assess it. So this is just an opportunity, short, sweet bullet points, numbers, something short that a teacher can glance at and say, oh, that's how this lesson runs. And again, it's to think about, okay, what would a new teacher or an inexperienced teacher do with this? How would it help them? To kind of keep that in mind. This is completely open. This could be a video, it could be an article, it could be a single question for reflection. We're all experienced teachers. We all know how a lesson opens, but there are teachers out there who don't. And they're like, oh, this is a cool idea, but how do I start? Where do I start with for this lesson? What do I have to build this foundation? And so that's just an opportunity, completely open-ended. Again, not an area of concern where I've ever had it like, oh, your intro is not good, I'm not going to publish this lesson. Okay, so not a problem. Then we get to the main component, right? The hands-on activity or the instruction. So important that, again, a novice teacher can follow your instructions, because what makes sense in your mind and what makes sense to me is probably has less requirements than what makes sense to a brand new teacher. I can look at a lot of lesson plans that come in and like, oh yeah, I've seen this before, or I get it, they mean this. But if I were brand new to education, some of the lesson plan instructions are difficult to follow. And that is a reason why a lesson might not be published. So again, that's the whole premise behind the first half of today's webinar is how do we take our lessons that are just complete and transition to making sure they're actually going to be published. So those step-by-step instructions, it can be student-facing, that's great, or it can just be teacher-facing. It doesn't matter as long as it's clear. Pictures are, as they say, worth 1,000 words. If you have pictures of what the setup looks like and pictures of what the final version looks like for a teacher, wow, that's amazing. Okay, I've got these materials, they're set out, this is how it's set up, and this is an example of the finished product. That's so powerful for a teacher to be able to look at that. They're new. At the same time, I get it. Sometimes you haven't done this lesson yet this year and you did it last year. You don't have any pictures. Fine, I totally understand that. But it's really helpful. If you submitted a lesson in year 1 or earlier in year 2 and you have pictures that you didn't include, send them to me. Like, hey, I sent this lesson in 18 months ago. Here are some pictures. Please do. I will go find it and I will update it with your pictures. It's that important, that powerful for teachers to be able to see that and be able to say, okay, visually, that's what this activity looks like. And if you have questions about how to, put those into your slides, any of that stuff, let me know. But you can always just send them to me and say, here's some pictures. If they have student faces in them, it's super helpful if you blot those out, put a circle over their face, whatever the case may be. If not, I'm going to do it anyway when it comes to me. It just makes the process more efficient if you've already taken care of that. And that's why there's a place for a picture here. Of course, you can resize, reformat, whatever you need to do. Assessment. This is an opportunity for you to make suggestions on how you might assess this lesson or activity. It doesn't have to be a huge, complex process. I'm going to go into a little bit more when we talk about AI with some of the options for this, but there needs to be something here, and whatever is here needs to connect directly to the activity and the standard. Those need to be in alignment so that a teacher going through this can understand, like, oh yeah, this assessment makes sense because we're talking about this standard about, how the sun is the source of energy for life on Earth, and the assessment is talking about photosynthesis. Great. But make sure that those align. It can be anything. If you look at my example lesson, there's notes here, and you'll have a variety of notes throughout the activity, which may take multiple days. You should check in with each group, formative assessment, ask probing questions, those sorts of things. And then here as well, process and product. How are we assessing? What are some suggestions here for that new teacher? You can put those in the speaker notes at the bottom. You can put them right on the slide. It doesn't matter as long as they're there. So assessment is an important slide. It can be a reason that things, most of the time, if it's a great lesson, it's just missing the assessment, we'll send it back to you and say, hey, this was accepted, you got credit, but if you want it published, we need the assessment slide improved. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then the last slide, differentiation. This is a tricky slide. Like, I get that. I've had some fellows who said, we don't need it because no, like it should be here on every lesson. There's always a way to make this lesson reach more students. That's the goal of this. For a lot of students, again, if to pop back over to my example, it says one way to differentiate in this lesson is provide some groups with a template. They're building something. So giving them a template, helping those students who struggle with that first step of getting started, that's really powerful. Sometimes giving them options instead of saying you can do anything, say, hey, try one of these 5 options. So different ways of helping to structure it for students. Just it's more inclusive of a wider range of abilities. And then extension and enrichment. Where can kids go from this? How can they connect this to the real world? How can they go deeper with this? For me, I struggle sometimes with my own kids' teachers because it just seems like, oh, that's the second worksheet. That's extension. Like, no, not just more work, right? It should be meaningful. It should be deeper learning. And this is also something we'll touch on when we talk about AI, but this is a requirement of all of our lessons. So it's kind of like a brief overview. I want to open it up now for specific questions about any of it. You're like, well, what if this happens? Will it still get published? What happens in this scenario? I wanted to start off with that foundation of like what we're looking for. These 10 slides are the minimum to check the box for your milestone, right? And that's fine. Teachers are extremely busy. And if that's what you have time for, I get it. We're not doing this to stress anyone out, but we are also building a database that serves teachers all over the country and honestly all over the world. Last week, I had a professor from Turkey requesting access to a lesson so that he could use it with his college students. That's amazing. Like your lesson might be used in a professional class, right, over in Turkey, and it's just incredible to think about the reach of a big database like this could be, really impressive, a really big benefit to our field. So if you have the time to be able to polish the lessons and make sure they're ready for publishing, that's great for everyone involved. So questions, you can come up and put it in the chat, you can use your mic. That's a good question, Jess. Because if there's a problem with a lesson plan that makes it unpublishable, will you let us know so we can fix it? The answer is it depends. If I get a lesson that is exactly 10 slides and there is one line of text on every slide, and someone truly did the bare minimum, thankfully that doesn't happen very often, the answer is no, you're not going to get it. I'm going to archive it. It's going to go away and I'm never going to look at it again. Because we have 1,300 lessons that are waiting to be deep reviewed right now. It's a lot. But if it's like a great lesson and there's a missing link or the link is broken or it needs a tweak on the assessment, or like we have one we just looked at during the training yesterday I did with my lesson reviewers. And I said, oh, we're looking at this lesson. It says there's a quiz, but there's no link to it. Yes, we will email you. We'll say, hey, we're looking at this lesson. We really love the idea. Would it be possible to have you add a rubric? Or do you have some pictures? Or, hey, the link is missing or broken. We will absolutely reach out to you if it's close. So Jess, your lesson would absolutely either be published or we'd let you know because they're very thorough. And there's no reason why we would ever say, nope, that one's getting archived. So yes, if we get to a point with a lesson that's really good and it just needs a few tweaks, one of two things is going to happen. Myself or one of the reviewers is just going to do it ourselves. If it's got everything's great except for it's the wrong standard, I'm just going to replace the standard with the right one because it's faster than trying to find your email and send you an email and wait for a response and all that stuff. But if it's missing an entire section or a section is weak, but the rest of the lesson is great, we will absolutely let you know. Are there certain topics we're seeking out? Yes and no. You can go to the database and you can do a search for different things. So, for example, we were looking at this yesterday. If you look up VEX, like VEX robotics, there are a total of 4 lessons here. There's not a lot. So you would just know, like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. There's only 4 lessons in the whole database. If you do something else like plants, and I love gardening and plants, but if you look at this, there are a lot of lessons on plants. I think there's either 10 or 20 per page, and there's over 8 pages. There are hundreds of lessons that are how to grow a seed in a bottle, how to grow a seed in a pot, how to grow a seed in paper towels. So, and that's fine. But if I get a lesson today that's how to grow a seed, I'm just going to archive it. Unless it's amazing, then I'll still publish it. But chances are it's going to be archived and we just file it under redundancy, right? We already have a lot of those. So you're more than welcome and it's appreciated if you browse the database before you come up with like, oh, I was thinking about this. I wonder if anybody's done it. Go search the database. The keyword database, keyword search works really well. And that's going to let you know. Or you can email us and say like, hey, I was thinking of this. Would that work? And I'll let you know right away. Generally speaking, we love it when it's integrated across multiple areas, so not just 2, but 3 or 4 of the STEM areas. If it's integrated with ELA, or social studies, or art, those are great. Those really show the nature of STEAM and STEM. So those are always good. Things that work in Arizona culture, Arizona history, those are really great because teachers are going to need those anyway, right? There are standards throughout the grade levels about Arizona. And so that can be really helpful. Working in a piece of literature is always a great building point or foundation point. I went and did a lesson with high schoolers today, and these are ed professions kids, so they're thinking about becoming teachers. And we read The Grouchy Ladybug, and then we built a catapult to represent the whale's tail. If you're not familiar with the story, Grouchy Ladybug tries to pick a fight with all these different creatures, and the last one is a blue whale. And he gets swatted by the tail and sent all the way back to where he started on a leaf eating aphids. And so we did this whole engineering activity and they created ladybugs and they created a leaf out of felt and they had to launch them at the felt. And I said, you could do science with this. You could talk about aphids and ladybugs and food chains, food webs. You could talk about ELA and order of story and talking about those components. You could talk about engineering and engineering the catapult, right? So there's all these different pieces you can bring in. And so anytime you can do that, that's great for a newer teacher. It's like, oh, I can start with a book that builds a common experience for my students. And these were high schoolers, they loved it. Like even big kids like to be read to. All the Imagineers books, like the Iggy Peck architect books, those sorts of things. Anything that's picture book, I've used all the classics. We do the Three Little Pigs, but we read the Three Little Javelinas instead. It's much more Southwest desert based. And so you get to work in a lot of those pieces. So we're not looking for anything specifically, but you can definitely see where the needs are by doing a quick search on content. Um, we probably have the most lessons that are science and engineering heavy. So if you have lessons that are really good at integrating math in a meaningful way, using current math standards and technology in a meaningful way, those are definitely valuable. The math focus that I see, or the issue with math, is often it's a science lesson, and someone will be like, "Oh, we're measuring how far a car rolls down off of a ramp," right? Total classic physics lesson. So they check this box, measurement and data, but it's a middle school lesson, and this math is like a third grade level. That's fine. Like that's the nature of doing some of these activities. And yes, the pigeon books are terrific. So you can definitely use those roller coaster even better. So integrating that with roller coasters. Thanks, Brittany. So math is tricky because it's usually an afterthought in a lot of these lessons. So if you can actually start with like, hey, I want to teach this concept. I was out doing a workshop with Bridget Haggis and like Havasu, and she has this great activity where she built putting greens and the hole and everything. And she has the students putt with Sphero mini robots, and the obstacles are built out of geometric nets. They're learning nets in geometry and how to build these 3D shapes based on a 2D. So it's kind of like when you have the six squares and it folds up into a cube, and that becomes the obstacle. So it's meaningfully using math as part of an engineering and technology lesson, and students have so much fun with it. So that would be my request. If you're looking for something, meaningful integration of math and technology is probably where we don't have nearly as many lessons. So that could be an option. Any other questions before we kind of go on to part two for this evening? Okay. Please feel free to jump in there with any questions as we go along. So I was doing a workshop recently, and I was working on a lesson using Makey Makeys. And I was like, well, this lesson's pretty cool. It's engaging, but I'm kind of missing a few things. I was missing a rubric. And so what I did, let's see here, there's probably this lesson. This is an example of a good lesson. It has 20 slides, all the components. She actually already has a rubric. But I'm going to copy this from the hands-on instructions, and I'm going to go over to ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT is free, and the 3.5 version, you can just go to ChatGPT, Google it, it'll come up, you can log in. And I'm going to put this in, and I'm just going to make one change. I want to make sure that it knows we're working with a Makey. And I'm going to say, based on this activity, create a rubric in a table. So I'm going to send that, and it's going to come up with this, and you can kind of see in real time. And so this is, it says scored on 1 to 5, scale 1 being lowest, 5 being the highest. It was kind of an idea. So pick things out of this. It knows like about Makeys, right? So it's got this background knowledge. And it says like, does the device effectively control Pac-Man or Google Snake? Value, responsiveness, accuracy, and ease of use. Score from 1 to 5. Functionality. Button design. Are the buttons large and spaced out enough to accommodate users with different physical abilities? Because it's pulling that out of the instructions, right? And it's immediately putting that into the rubric. And so it's an option for when you get to like the assessment piece, and you're like, oh, this activity is great, but what do I want to include? Including a rubric is really powerful for newer teachers. And so that's one way to do this. Actually, I wonder, this is one of my old ones. This is also using Makey, the whole conversation I had with ChatGPT. Here we go. So I put in, kind of funny, I put in my instructions, and I just said, given these instructions, and I forgot to finish my question. And it took my instructions and it turned it into this beautiful, like, well formatted list. Illustrate your story, record your story, engineer your storyboard, connect to Makey. This beautiful list. And then I said, create a rubric and a table for this activity. And this rubric I thought was terrific. It gave me excellent support, and it was perfectly aligned with the activity, which is to create an interactive storyboard where if you touch the pictures, it reads part of the story to the student. And so I was like, wow, there you go. Look at this rubric that it did in like 7 seconds, including formatting, and I'm ready to go. And then I started diving deeper into it. I said, what areas on academic standards are related to this activity? That's a bad question. That's too broad. And it gave me this stuff. I was like, okay, tell me more about the science standards. It went a little deeper into the science standards. And how about ed tech standards? It pulled the ISTE standards that align, right? And I just kept going back, and it knows what you've already asked. You can say, well, what about this? Tell me more. I said Arizona ELA standards, and it gave me this. And then I got really specific. The ELA standards again, but specifically for middle school, and it pulled the actual coded standards that would align with this activity. And so you see reading standards for literature, and these are the actual standards it was able to pull, and it was able to give me this list. So as you're thinking about your activity and wanting to show that it's integrated across multiple content areas, you can just pop these in here, and it'll give you more and more. And the more specific you are, the more purposeful the responses will be. I asked it about slide decks. It said, I can't make a slide deck, but I can tell you what to put on each slide. And it gave me an overview. So even if you have a lesson idea, you could ask it, what might go on some slides for this lesson? And it'll tell you kind of an overview of each slide. I asked it about images. It doesn't do images, but it told me what you might ask an image generator. And then I went on to other questions about science standards and electricity. What I found with the science standards is a little tricky. Our science standards are in PDF. So if you go to the ADE science standards page, they're in PDF, Word files, and ChatGPT can't access those easily. What I found is if I copy and paste the standards into ChatGPT, I think I have this here somewhere. No, I think it was the egg drop one. So I went and I pasted the right one. I went and copied and pasted the science standards for 6th through 8th. Oh yeah, here we go. So these are my inputs, right? This part, I just copied all of the science standards for 7th grade and for 8th grade and for 6th grade. And then you can ask it and it'll reference those. So it's kind of interesting. It's an extra step, but it's still a lot faster than trying to do it yourself and going through all of them and reading them. And so then I could ask it, for an 8th grade project involving building a hydroponic station, can you align it with the following standards? And it put this together, right? It then pulled the actual science standards out of what I provided to it. So it's just something to be aware of. Back to ELA standards again. So that's one option for using ChatGPT for this. Another option is if we go back to, look at this one, right? And so this is one I created with you guys about the video game controller using Makey Makey that created the rubric. And I can ask it, like, what is a fun activity to introduce this lesson? And it'll think about it. And it said, start by introducing the concept of alternative game controllers, talk about the materials list, create teams, do a brainstorming session, build prototypes, have a testing phase, right? And then go through. And it's not something that necessarily is going to be ready to just copy and paste into your lesson, but it's a great thought partner when you're like, well, this is how I would do it, but how else might this be done? How might this be more in depth? Might it be better? And so this is a great opportunity to kind of have this back and forth with a thought partner. And again, this is just one of the many options within generative AI to use ChatGPT. It's called a chatbot. This version is free. And then there's a paid version that does more. It's a little bit more powerful, a little bit more robust. It can do data analysis and those sorts of things. But this is completely free. So let's just try one. I'm going to start a new conversation. Give me, someone type in the chat an activity idea or a lesson idea. Something like, oh, photosynthesis or whatever. What's one that we should type in here? All right. Okay, so I'm putting design a middle school science lesson about rock type, title, grade level, objectives, the materials list, the lesson plan, the introduction. It's got the agenda, the times in there, presentation about rock types, hands-on exploration, divided into small groups, right? Group discussion, conclusion and assessment, and extension activities. And so that's pretty basic, but you get the idea of like, oh, okay, that's a great place to start. Now I'm going to go this direction with it, or I'm going to add on to it, and you can then ask it in depth, like, oh, what standards are aligned with this, and how would I integrate this with technology? So let me try another one. Connect to the pigeon will ride the roller coaster. So you'll notice that because I asked it for middle school the first time, it stuck with it. So you wouldn't specify if you want a second grade lesson, or I could even say that, like, you know, thank you. How about second grade? And it's going to go over it. It's going to do it again, but this time for second grade with appropriate objectives and activities. And so you can see how this could also be used from like a differentiation perspective. You can put in a text that you're using and say, rewrite this for third grade level. Rewrite this at a lexile appropriate for eighth grade. It'll rewrite the article for you. It'll give you basically leveled readers when you don't already have that. And you can just copy and paste articles. There's a limit on how long it can be. I tried to copy a 25-page PDF. It did not like that, but a shorter article, a couple pages should be no problem. Last one, solar eclipses. Even comes up with, this quaint little titles. Exploring solar eclipses, a celestial phenomenon. Went back to middle school because I didn't specify, again, objectives, material, styrofoam ball, flashlight, classic, right? Classic eclipse activity. Hold up the light source, styrofoam ball, cause the shadow. We've all seen that one in science classes. Internet access for research. Hey, if you have an eclipse to view, eclipse glasses, it even has safety precautions, right? Cultural and historical significance can be part of it. Like I didn't, that's not the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think about a solar eclipse lesson, but sure enough, there it is. And you could ask it like, you know, maybe you want to say, what could I do with the standards for this activity? And then the way it goes. And so it won't just give you the standard, it'll tell you how to use it. Students could use technology to research more about solar eclipses, including the historical significance, cultural interpretation, scientific explanation. So then it's giving you a mini activity aligned with each standard. So if you're like, I have this great science lesson, but I need more technology, I need to add an engineering component. And all of these things will help to ensure that the lessons are likely to be published. So those are all great. That's a great way to use chatbots. Any questions about this? Anything I can clarify before we kind of move on? Yeah, that was kind of my reaction too. It was kind of like, wow, that was better than I thought. Yeah, just that's a great point and a great question. For our purposes here, because my goal is creating the resource for students and teachers, I'm not too concerned with it if it's created by AI, or if they use it as a thought partner. I mean, ideally, AI is a sandwich, right? With a human as the bread and the AI in the middle. You start with the human ideas and context, you put it into the system, it gives you ideas back. And then at the end, you have this human overview, review it, because there's this neat term in AI or generative AI called hallucination. That's where you ask AI a question and the answer is bizarre. It doesn't know the answer, so it creates one. But you have to be aware of that. You have to know. I was asking one, I was using a Magic School AI recently, and it was giving me science standards that don't exist as far as I can tell. It's kind of mashing things together. So I think it's apparent if you don't check your work. For our purposes, I'm not too concerned about that aspect of it. It is something, long term that there are moral and ethical questions about sharing something as your own work that's AI generated. for our purposes, I think if it can be a support to give us higher quality lessons that will support learners in the future, I'm okay with that. Yes, the meeting will be recorded, and yes, we will email the link out to you. And yeah, as far as teachers being replaced by AI, I've listened to 2 podcasts recently about AI in education specifically, and there was a comment made by someone that said, "Oh, AI lacks heart." And one of the guest speakers said, "That's great. I want AI to lack heart because that's our role as a teacher. Our role is to know our students, is to form those relationships, to understand what they need. AI is a tool, it's an assistant, a thought partner to help us make those connections, to spend more time on the human component and less time doing some of the tedious pieces. And we could have a whole conversation at the end if we have time about some of the research that teachers have done on themselves and others in terms of human bias and human inaccuracy that can be compensated for with AI, but definitely something to consider. Yep, Jess, I get it. You know, wanting to create a lesson about these ideas, and I know that your lessons in particular are so thorough and so detailed. So I get it. I think it's a matter of if this supports more teachers to be able to create better learning experiences for students, and that's the priority from a lesson planning component. In terms of student-facing AI, that's a whole other conversation. And I think there's some really positive things there, and there's some things we need to be cautious with as well. For us, for today, we're just talking about how it can help us make better lessons. Um, yeah, Kathy, I agree. You know, it's like sometimes I get so fixated on my own ideas. I'm like, oh, I know, Sam, this is a great idea. And then I don't even consider these other options. And sometimes AI can pop in with those, like the cultural piece of solar eclipses. Like, yeah, I know that right at the back of my mind. But if I'm thinking about teaching it, having taught middle school science, I'm thinking about the logistics. I'm thinking about how do I get them to understand that it's not that the sun's going behind the cloud or that it's disappearing or whatever the misconceptions are. I want them to know it's the shadow of the moon. um, and so I get so fixated sometimes in focus. AI is a nice opportunity to bounce ideas and get other thoughts. So that is ChatGPT. That's chatbot style. There's a bunch of them out there. It's probably the most well known. There's a few that are school specific. One's called School AI, one's called Magic School AI. I don't have a ton of experience with them, but they have lesson planning assistants. You can pick your grade level and it'll know your standards. And a lot of those have free features and then paid features, but the free features are enough to get started. So those are things to check out. Some of those are guaranteed to be FERPA compliant, which is great. Obviously, you don't want to be putting student names or anything like that into ChatGPT FERPA issues, but just in terms of this aspect of it and writing lessons and being a thought partner, I think it can be really helpful. So the other component to generative AI, other than text, is images. And so there are, again, a lot of different options. One of the free options is Adobe Firefly. And it's the same thing. You're going to put prompts in, and the more detailed your prompt, the more the image is going to reflect what you wanted. And so some of the images you see for our lessons, like this one, this is AI generated. This is using Adobe Express, but same idea. This one is not. So it is a part of the process. The nice thing about generative AI images is that they're completely unique. If I keep hitting generate on the same prompt, every time it comes up, the images will be slightly different. So from a copyright perspective, and you'll see this in the fine print on all of these sites, you own the right to any images you create. So for students who are accustomed to going to Google and stealing copyrighted images and using them without quoting and citing them, this is terrific. Because when we can get this safely in front of students, they can generate images for their presentations that are more focused on what they want to use. You don't have any copyright issues, and they're unique. So you don't get 13 lessons, or sorry, 13 activities from your students all with the same pictures, because that's the first thing that came up on Google. And so this was, I don't know, this one was not something I was messing with. But sometimes you want a lesson, it's on launching rockets. So you might say, rocket in flight against a dark sky background. And it'll come up and it'll give you some other ideas. What started with what I wrote, and then, oh, light from the launch spot. Okay. And then I'm going to hit generate, and it's going to take a minute. The paid versions, they're usually faster. Some of these have limits. I know Adobe Express is like 25 a day. I'm not sure about Firefly because it just does images. And now I've got, these are classic American shuttle rocket images. And then I can give it feedback. I can tell it what I want to change about it. But I'd rather have a student use this than someone else's picture that they stole, right? And so for you, for a lesson plan, I've had I know for sure one lesson that used AI generated images was terrific. They were robotic images. And I asked him, and I think he was using um, Dolly, which is the partner program to ChatGPT. That's paid. So this is free, which is always nice for teachers. But this can be really powerful. And you can choose the effect. Do you want it to be animated? Do you want it to be hyper realistic? You can tell it that you want it in the style of a particular artist if you want to do it that way. There's a lot of things you can do with this and for your lesson plans and also with your students. So for example, you might be doing a lesson on rockets and you might just have this picture as one of the slides. And in the notes at the bottom, it says to the teacher, have the students reflect on what this image means to them. What do they know about it? Does it make them feel anything? What could go wrong? What could go right? Why are they blasting off? All these prompts could come out of this image, and the kids are being reflective. They're interested. What's even better is if you have them give you the prompt. So they're still not using the AI because a lot of districts that's still blocked and banned for various reasons. Some of them valid. Have them give you the prompt and say, okay, we're going to be doing this lesson on, a particular phenomena. And so then you could ask for it to, let's say, Newton's cradle in motion. Let's see if it pops anything up for. Now, what's interesting, I ran this through Adobe Express, and half of the images were babies and cradles. So we're going to see what it comes out. Much better, much better. And so, you could have them come up with the prompts and ask them like, what do you think would happen if I took one of the spheres and held it out and let it go? What do you think would happen then? And then you have them come up with all these ideas and then you show them the phenomenon, right? You have them make observations about it with a real Newton's cradle, and then you progress through the rest of your lesson on force, motion, conservation of momentum, whatever the concepts are. And so it's just a neat opportunity for us. And these are obviously done in like a very artsy way. Somewhere in here, you can switch to photos, regenerate. It just depends on what you're looking for. They don't do text. You can't ask it to include a word. So those are more photorealistic options for a Newton's cradle. And it's not even one of the funny ones, the memes where it's kids on swings and the physics teachers are making them bounce back and forth. But I bet you could get it to do that too. So lots of options in here when we're looking for photographs to go along with it, to bring the lesson to life or the lesson plan to life. Generate some images, include those in your lesson. And, it's a great way to prompt students with kind of big idea opportunities. And like Kathy said, any sort of phenomena that you're looking to produce, the likelihood you may be able to generate an image of it and start with that. Lots of different possibilities here to enhance lessons from the bare minimum. I honestly get lessons sometimes and they look like my template. Like if I look at the preview along the side, it looks like there's nothing written. And then I click on it and it'll say, this is for third grade. You need computers. And then I'll click on the next one and it'll have one standard, apparently been signed out of my account here. So definitely some different options using AI to enhance these lessons. Yeah, so this is Adobe Firefly, and it's its own page within the Adobe family of programs. So the first one that comes up and says get it for free, doesn't actually get anything, doesn't download anything. Now up here, I'm logged in, so it'll ask you to create, oh, there you go, my generative credits. I have 25 credits for the month. I've used 11 of them, showing you fun pictures today. I used some of them before that. So a lot of these are free. there are other ones. So if you just do free Gen AI image generator, you're going to get a bunch. Can't say they're all great, but some, come from reputable places. Stick to those. Microsoft has one. Canva will do it. A lot of people have premium accounts with Canva through their school district, so that's great. Um, some of the other ones, there's Adobe. The big name, yeah, Canva, absolutely. And so if you run out of your credits for Adobe Firefly, you can just go find another one or create a new Adobe account. I'm not necessarily promoting that, but I'm just saying we're teachers, we got to find a way. It's funny that this one is better than Dolly. Dolly is probably one of the most famous ones. It is paid. I think you get the latest version of ChatGPT and Dolly combined for $20 a month, which some people think that's nothing. Some people think that's a lot. Whatever people are at, it's an option. Then you typically don't have those limits. But AI, you can definitely do that in Canva. It's the same idea. You're going to put in a prompt. You're going to ask for it to come up with images. Yeah, lots of different options there. I'm not sure how I feel about Canva opening a new tab every time I click on something, but I do love Canva, so I think I'll let it slide. Various options, various resources. Just to kind of give you an idea, I told you like this was an example of a lesson that got published. And so as you click through here, you'll see the notes for the teachers are thorough, right? That's a big deal. Materials list doesn't have to have that many different things. Standards has ed tech standards, has ELA standards, science and engineering practices. Remember that science engineering practices can't be your only standard, but they're terrific to include because to me, they're some of the most important pieces in the STEM realm of standards. But we've been asked by the powers that be that they not be our only academic standard. Objectives, multiple on task to the activity, a bullet point list for the agenda, a good intro activity, watching a video, there's a read aloud, and this lesson, it's got all the pieces, right? Go through the design thinking process or the engineering design process, got a video to introduce makey-makeys, hands-on activity, and then it's got the rubric here, different assessment pieces, closure activity, and then differentiation. This is like a lesson that if I were reviewing this, aside from like maybe fixing a typo or making sure a link works, this is being published. Like hands down, this is just going to be like, all right, that looks great, published. So it's just something to consider. Your lessons don't have to have 20 slides. I've had terrific lessons with 12, maybe 10. Maybe. That's the bare minimum. This is my example lesson. It has 13 slides. Pretty good. Not my best work, but it gets the job done. And so same thing, make sure that you have all the pieces, that they're easy to understand, and that's really going to go a long way in making sure that your lessons get published. All right. Any questions? Anything else I can pull up? I can show, I can share. We got 10 minutes till 5. I'm happy to stay on and answer questions that are more specific to lesson ideas. Or if you want me to run through anything again, I'm happy to do so. Two of you asked the same question. Is there a grade band where we need more lessons? Generally speaking, when they first started this project, the grade distribution of teachers involved was a bell curve, with the peak being 4th through 8th grade. And so you can imagine we have a lot of 4th grade teachers, 4th through 8th grade teachers, and then a downslope for K3 and high school. So in theory, K3 and high school have a lot less lessons. Generally speaking, a lot of K3, K4 teachers are persuaded by administration not to spend a lot of time on STEM. And everyone who's in K6 education knows that because there's a big push for reading, writing, and math because that's what's tested. And like, I get it. Those are foundational skills. Sure, they're important, fine. But that doesn't mean we get to discount the validity and importance of other skills that go along with STEM, things like communication and collaboration, being able to think critically, being creative. And so we typically have less lessons in the K3 band. And we have less for high school simply because we don't have a lot of high school teachers um, in our cohort of teachers. So those two areas probably have greater need for high quality lessons. If we were to do a search, I would assume that of the published lessons, there's like 1,700. There's probably only 1 to 200 in the K3 and the high school range, and the rest are 4-8. Doesn't mean you have to, but if you're looking to meet a need, that'd probably be where I would direct you. Absolutely. Yeah, no, this is it for today. I wanted to kind of keep it short. I know all of your time is very valuable. This will be available as a recording if you want to go back through and see the resources. And we'll be sending that out soon. If any of you'd like to stay on, I'm happy to answer specific questions. That's a great question, Jeff. That's not my area, but I heard it soon. Someone asked Mike when I was with him, and he said soon. I don't know what soon means, but I would assume by the end of the month, probably. But you never really know when it might be. But that's kind of what I would think.